I don't know if you have ever done a deep dive into historic newspapers, but they are one of my favorite resources for doing family history research. Hi, everyone. I'm Crista Cowan. I'm the corporate genealogist here at Ancestry. And today we get to talk about how to use newspaper.com hints on your Ancestry family tree. Now, we will be going in and out of newspapers.com as well as in and out of ancestry.com. I'll be sharing my screen. I'll be walking you through how the two integrate. I'll also be giving you some information about how to use and evaluate those hints and then how to combine that information to create a story. Because I don't know about you, but that's kind of what I'm after. The information is interesting, but the stories are the real gold there. So that's how we're going to proceed in our 60 minutes together today. Now, there will be a few times where I will ask you to respond in the chat to a couple of questions. If you're watching this live on Zoom as part of our Wednesday virtual event series, you can respond directly in the chat. If you're watching a replay of this on the Ancestry YouTube channel, you can respond in the comments. I do monitor those because I love to see the things that you all are both learning and discovering in your family history journey. So here is my first question to you, and I would love a response in the chat or in the comments, which is, what is the single most interesting newspaper headline or discovery that you have made? And so I'm going to go ahead and open up the chat and just kind of keep an eye on that as you start to share your answers there. I'm also going to share my screen and I'm just going to walk you through a few different discoveries that are possible in newspapers, because I think sometimes, especially if you're new to family history or if you haven't used newspapers as part of your family history discovery process yet, you might not even know what's possible. So you can see across the top of my screen, I have a whole bunch of tabs open, and that's because I've preloaded a bunch of articles or snippets of newspaper news that might be of interest. So this first one comes from the Lincoln, Nebraska Journal Star from January of 1879. And the reason this is interesting is because right here, excuse me, right here, under the news of the city, it says that a baby boy was born Tuesday morning, January 14th, at the house of the railroad boss, Daly. Now, I'm assuming Daly is the last name of the railroad boss, and now we have a birth date of a baby boy that was born then. So if you had been looking in the 1880 census for the Daly family in Lincoln, Nebraska, and they were your family, and you knew that they had a 1-year-old child, but you couldn't find the birth date, that would be a little bit of a challenge. And the bigger challenge is that Nebraska, I don't think, was keeping official birth records at the time at a state level. And so there might not even be a birth record that exists. The fact that this child was born at home increases the likelihood that a birth record might not exist. And so you might struggle to validate the birth date of this child in this family. Well, here is just this tiny little 2-line snippet in the local newspaper that lists the date that that child was born. And here's the thing about newspapers, especially when you're talking about births, marriages, and deaths in particular, is that they can't print news that didn't happen. And they can't print news before it happens. And so you can have some pretty high confidence in the accuracy of some of the information that you find in newspapers, particularly as it relates to births, marriages, and deaths. This child's not going to be born in 1880 or 1881 or 1882, even though you may have other records that list that as the birth year. If the child was born in 1879 and the newspaper was printed in 1879, that gives you a higher degree of confidence that that birth date is accurate. Now, you'll notice there's lots of other little things noted here in the newspaper, things like the funeral of Aldous Cody taking place Thursday. Again, they typically don't bury people before they died, and so now you have a range or a window of when this individual died. You've got information about local businesses and just what's happening in the community, which is always interesting to read. So here is my first tip to you. Whenever you find information about an ancestor in a newspaper, read the paper, right? Look to see what was happening in the community. It starts to give you context and a feel for the kind of community that they were living and working and being educated in and worshiping in, and what was happening in that community. It also starts to give you a better understanding of some of the sentiment of the time when it comes to religion and politics and racial issues and commerce and all sorts of the news of the day. So that is one example. Here's another example, and I happen to particularly love this one because one of the challenges that we often have, especially like as we go back in our family tree, is that the further back you go, the harder it is to get accurate or precise information, especially as it relates to dates and places. You might have a general birth date or a general birth country or state of birth, but to get really precise is sometimes tricky. And one of the things we don't realize we can do is look further ahead in their life, or sometimes even past their life, to see what was written about them that will give you that information. So in this particular instance, there is an individual. It's a Jewish man, a rabbi, who was 109 years old when he died. And this is a type of an obituary that has been written for him. And you'll see the newspaper has done some research, so much so that they claim, so far as possible, the records of his birth have been verified. So they're claiming to know he really is 109 years old. And then they just talk about how he died. They list his address. They list the name of his wife, how old she is, his son, how old he is, how many grandchildren and great-grandchildren they have, where he was buried, right? That seems like pretty typical information for an obituary, except you'll notice that some of that is a little unusual. Typically, in an obituary, they're not listing the ages of the spouse and the children. So there's some added information here. And the interesting thing about this particular obituary, it was published in the Savannah Morning News in 1887. It was published in 4 or 5 different newspapers, and different newspapers, depending on how many column inches they had to devote to the story, edited out some information. So sometimes it's useful to look at every instance of that particular thing being reported, because in some cases, the full article might be listed, and in other cases, that article might be truncated. So that's my tip number 2, which is always check to see if this particular little news story, if this obituary, if this piece of information has been published in multiple newspapers, and read all accounts of it to see if any of them have been edited differently. Okay. Now, in addition to that, we learn about his health at the end of his life. We learn who his doctor was. Apparently, there were no HIPAA laws at the time. We scroll down a little bit more, and here we learn he was born in 1778. So certainly no birth records are available from then, and particularly not from this place. I'm going to not even try and pronounce it, a small village of Russian Poland near Warsaw. So now we learn the year of his birth, which may have been difficult to ascertain from some other records, or difficult to be precise about. We learn the specific village where he is from, which is also pretty rare information and sometimes difficult to come by, because a lot of times what happens, especially with immigrants, is they'll say stuff like, oh, well, I'm from Warsaw or near Warsaw, instead of giving the name of the actual town. And having the name of the actual town means you now know exactly where to go to continue to look for additional information. In addition to that, it says he was one of 21 children, youngest of 16 brothers. So now we know 21 children in this family. He's the baby. There are 16 of them are boys. The rest are girls. It talks about when he got married, the year he got married. It talks about when and how he joined the military. You scroll down a little bit, it talks about a story from his life, and then it talks about when he immigrated to the United States, which apparently he did at the age of 72 years old. So you see, then it talks about his grandchildren and when and where he became a rabbi and the fact that he did not drink, right? Lots of details included in this particular obituary for this particular individual. Now, he was a rabbi and he was really old, and so that was newsworthy. Your family member may not be prominent in the community, but sometimes by nature of their age, or by nature of the fact that they were one of 21 children, or by nature of something interesting or newsworthy, they may have had something written up about them in the newspaper. You just never know until you look. And sometimes the details you get out of that are invaluable. Okay, here is another example of an article. This is from the Atlanta Constitution in August of 1887. And I just want to point out something small. This happens to be actually, I think, article about a crime that took place in New York. It's being published in the Atlanta newspaper. But down here, there's just one tiny little line, and it's one of those things that might be missed if you weren't paying close attention. So this article is about this individual whose last name is Mooney. And here, buried in the article, it says, Mooney said that he was born in the County Clare, Ireland, and he had been in this country 15 years. At the time, he was in the clothing business in 16th Street. Okay. And then it goes on to talk about the rest of the crime. So that is, again, a piece of information that might not be available anywhere else. Every census record you're going to look at for this guy for the 15 years he'd been in the country, right? You're going to have in New York in particular, you're going to have not just federal censuses every 10 years on the zeros, you're going to have state censuses every 10 years on the fives. And those census records almost universally will state his birthplace as Ireland. And if you've ever tried to do Irish research, you know that the singular piece of information that is most important to make sure you've got the right person, or at least to have a hope of having the right person, is knowing exactly where in Ireland they came from. And so now you have this buried in a newspaper article that he came from County Clare, and that he immigrated 15 years ago. Now, that 15 years, because it's not a round number. Round numbers are 10, 20, 30, but sometimes people round to the nearest 5, right? The idea is when somebody gives you a year that's 10 or 15 or 20 or 25 years ago, you have to be a little bit suspicious, because a lot of times people just kind of round in their heads, but that gives you a window to go looking for a possible passenger list or immigration information. And because you now know where he came from, you're more likely to identify the right person in the passenger list when you see where his other fellow passengers came from. Okay, so that is an important thing to think about. Read through the article, make sure you understand that there could be gold hidden in there. Okay. Next up, this is from, and I'm going to mispronounce this word, Oconomowoc. I think that's in Wisconsin, newspaper from 1902. Now, remember, one of the challenges that we have in family history is that a lot of states in the US, a lot of provinces and territories in Canada, they didn't start keeping birth, marriage, and death records until, sometimes the early 1900s, which mean if the records are old, they either weren't kept, they could have been lost or destroyed, or they just haven't been findable yet. And so newspapers can help fill in some of those gaps. But sometimes you have to remember you have to look forward. So this is a 1902 newspaper article, but it's talking about the 60th anniversary of this couple. So again, milestone moments, sometimes when they are significant and the newspaper needs to fill column inches in the paper, make the news. Now, I do want to point out that this particular image of this particular newspaper is really faded, right? So if I zoom out, you'll notice like there are some parts of this that are almost unreadable. It's just the nature of newspaper print. And so Ancestry, newspapers.com, especially when they're trying to digitize newspapers, they do the best they can with the images that are made available to them. But that means that sometimes this information does not get indexed exactly accurately because of the way that the newspaper print is or is not readable. Now you'll notice there's a whole lot of information in this paper. And some of it is very sensational, right? Robbers get $8,000. Murderous maniac makes his escape. Bright young man dies of appendicitis, right? Like there's so aged woman falls and breaks neck. Like the way that newspapers reported local news becomes really, really, really valuable as you're trying to find information about your people. Now, this particular thing here, Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Thomas celebrated their 60th anniversary of their marriage yesterday. So now we know they were married on October 31st, because this is the November 1st. Actually, they were married on the 29th, because the snippet came from October 30th. So the snippet was published or written October 30th. They celebrated their marriage yesterday. So the day before October 30th, 60 years ago. He is 87. She is 80. He's been ill. Oh, she's been ill and wasn't expected to live, but is now improving. Okay. So you get a little snippet into their life, you get some information about their ages, and you get their wedding date, all from these 6 or 7 lines in this newspaper. Okay, we're going to look at a couple more, and then we are going to move over to Ancestry. So in this particular newspaper, Sacramento Daily Union, 1855. Okay, so we're talking the gold rush has started, right, in 1849. It's still going on. People are going out to California. Lots of stuff is happening. Some people go completely missing. Sometimes deaths are reported about local people. Sometimes deaths are being reported regionally. In this case, you'll notice under this death column in this Sacramento, California newspaper from 1855, they're reporting in this city, so in Sacramento, the death of this person. In this city, the death of this person. Then they start reporting down here in Salt Lake City, this person died. In Pleasant Grove City, this person died, which is interesting because that's where I live. In Salt Lake, in Los Angeles. Okay. So sometimes deaths are reported to places where they might have had family, or sometimes the newspapers, especially the further back in time you go, the more broad coverage that they have. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, next up is a Los Angeles newspaper, and sometimes news gets printed that feels like it has no connection at all. So you may sometimes get hinted to a newspaper that is from a place that your family member never lived, never had any association with, and you may not on the surface have any clue why information about them was reported in that paper. So here is a little snippet in this Los Angeles, California Star, again, 1855. An old lady named Sarah Canby, aged 107 years old, recently died at New Liberia, Louisiana. She was born in the city of New York on the 25th of December, 1746. So they're reporting her death in 1855 in the city of Los Angeles. She was living in Louisiana she was born in New York. And if this is your ancestor, you just hit pay dirt, right? Because now you have in 4 little lines really detailed information that you might not have even thought to look at because it was being reported in a newspaper from California. Okay, and then there are also often court actions reported in newspapers. So lawsuits, and in this case, wills being filed. So when you come across that, that tells you that a will exists and that you can go looking for it. And so pay attention, don't skip over things that feel insignificant. Real estate transactions, court actions, any of those are going to give you a clue that more information exists out there for you to go digging into. Now, one of my favorite things in newspapers is what we call society pages. Society pages feel maybe a little bit frivolous. This is from a society page in San Antonio, Texas in 1914. And what you'll notice is the society pages very often break up the news by community. So you'll see here little headings: Belton, Round Rock, Spofford, Eagle Pass, Rockdale, Bastrop, right? Okay, all the little communities. And you can read through the community news. It feels a little bit like snooping on a little town Facebook page, right? Newspapers were like the Facebook of their day. They're talking about who's going where and who's doing what, right? So you see things like St. Joseph's Altar Society met with Mrs. John Cook Friday afternoon when plans for the fall work were discussed. Refreshments were served during the social hour. Why would we care? Well, we would care because now we know that Mrs. John Cook, who's in Rockdale, is affiliated with the St. Joseph's Altar Society, which gives us a clue about her religion, which then could lead us to church records of baptisms and marriages and burials, possibly the location where she's buried, information about the people that she associated with. It seems like a little bit of innocent information, but it really could give you more information. Miss Clara Estine Cook entertained with a magic lantern party in compliment to Carmelita Dunnington of Huntsville. After the picture program, games were played on the lawn, ending with refreshments, which were served in the dining room, right? Again, might seem silly, but it gives you a person in a place at a time. And sometimes it gives you more to research, and sometimes it just gives you an idea of who they were in the community and who they were associated with, so that when you start to find other records, you can have greater confidence that those records really are about this person, okay? And then sometimes these little snippets give you information that actually helps you track additional marriages or relationships. In this case, Mrs. Wider of Winchester arrived here in that community to be the guest of her son, A. Noack, and other relatives. Mrs. Annie and Katie Weiser were the guests of Mrs. Noack, okay? Now, I suspect that this should say Weiser, not Weider, but that's worth investigating. Also, why does a woman have a different last name than her son? That's usually an indication that she has remarried. And so Noack was likely her first husband, Wider was likely her second husband, and now we know to go look for another marriage for her. We also could investigate who are these young women and why were they her guests? Are they her stepdaughters? Are they nieces? What is the relationship of the people that are mentioned? 4 little lines, that's all. And yet it could give you a whole other set of information about this person. I always love when they publish information about children who are a year old. Sometimes you'll find pictures in newspapers. And so just the little snippet, Benjamin Franklin Harrigal Jr., son of Mr. and Mrs. B.F. Harrigal of LaGrange, right? And now there's this gorgeous picture of that child. Lots of communities publish first-year birthday or fifth-year birthday, especially like kind of small local papers will publish that information. Okay, let's see. Lawsuits. We talked about court actions, right? So anytime you see a court action, there could be additional information in subsequent or previous editions of that same newspaper following the court case. There could also be an opportunity for you to contact the courthouse and see if there's information. I think sometimes this also gives you just a little insight into the personalities of some of these people. So this is one of my great-grandfather's uncles. And so he sues his neighbor in 1914 for $2,355 in damages. B.Y. Mulliner this week filed a suit, so he is the one filing the lawsuit, in the district court against Arthur Hawkins, claiming damages on 3 counts, aggregating to this amount. The principal cause grows out of Hawkins' dog having bitten Mulliner on the latter's dry farm in Cedar Valley last June, so a couple months earlier. The complaint charges that Hawkins set the dog on his neighbor, but the latter strenuously denies the accusation. The other causes grew out of the alleged trespasses of Hawkins' pigs and other animals destroying Mulliner's grain. The 2 men are neighbors in the north end of Cedar Valley. Jacob Evans is Mr. Mulliner's attorney. So you start to see this information about personalities, about conflicts, about how people are living or maybe not living well together in communities. And that is priceless information when you're putting together pieces of the stories of people's lives. Okay, last 2 we're going to look at here. So this is from a Canadian newspaper, so it's important. I focused a lot on I grabbed a lot of examples from US papers because I was pulling things from my own family tree, but wanted to make sure that you all know that there are also newspapers available for Canada, for England, for other places, and I'll show you how to see what's available. This is the front page of the newspaper. And so when I said earlier, always look at the paper to get a context about what's happening in the community, the front page of a newspaper always tells you what that community, or at least the journalists in that community, deemed the most important news of the day. And so sometimes when you find stories about your people on those pages, that tells you something about the significance of that. So in this case, there was a missing person, and the missing person was the husband of Mrs. Arna Mansfield. And she lives on the bank of the Elbow River near Holy Cross Hospital. This is from the Calgary, Alberta newspaper. And she paid a medium, essentially, to locate her missing husband. And the medium failed to deliver, and so she's suing her. But what this little snippet of article gives you is it gives you the fact that where she's living and when her husband went missing. So if you're looking at the 1911 census and there's no husband and you're trying to figure out what happened to him, you might dive into newspapers to see if there are some answers there. Another thing that very often gets reported in newspapers, this is from an English newspaper in 1900, has to do with military service. And not just during wartime. This is years prior to World War I, but we have these individuals serving in the military. And in this case, there's actually a transcription of the letter that a soldier wrote home to his mother after he was injured, and it was published in the local newspaper. And so it gives information about his service, and it gives information about his injury, and it gives information about when he is coming home. So lots and lots of military information also gets published in newspapers. So let's talk just a little bit about how and where all of this information gets put online. Newspapers.com is and always has been owned by Ancestry. Ancestry launched this as a separate website for a couple of reasons. The primary reason is because I know this is going to be hard to believe. There are people who are interested in social history who are not interested in family history. And so it is a standalone subscription that you can buy. Access to what's on newspapers.com if that's all you're interested in. Now, we know, of course, how valuable newspapers are to people who are interested in family history. Clearly, I hope I've just demonstrated that. So, newspapers.com in the United States is included with the Ancestry All Access subscription. And so if you have an Ancestry All Access subscription, you have access to all the records on Ancestry, all the records on Fold 3, and all of the records on newspapers.com. Okay. Now, outside of the US, the subscriptions work a little bit differently. If you have specific questions about that, you can go into the Q&A and let them know where you're at, and they'll let you know exactly what your subscription includes or does not include. But you can always purchase newspapers.com as a separate or add-on subscription, no matter where you are in the world. But in order to decide if it's going to be valuable to you or not, you need to know what's included. And so whether you have a subscription or not, you can come in here to newspapers.com and you can see exactly what newspapers are included. There is a browse structure. The browse structure on newspapers.com works a little bit like the card catalog on Ancestry. It's my favorite thing, you know that. But this is going to allow you to see what newspapers exist on the website before you ever purchase a subscription. So you can see there are currently 18 countries where Ancestry has records or images of newspapers available. You can click on that particular country, and then it's just a matter of narrowing it down by geographic location. So in this case, we're going to go, let's see, we'll go to Utah since that's where I'm sitting right now. Then it'll go to the particular cities or communities. I happen to be sitting right now in Lehi, Utah. And then it will show you the newspapers that are included in that from that city. Now, one of the things you're going to notice, and I'm going to zoom in so it's really obvious here, is that some newspapers will have a little plus sign next to them and some will not. Those little plus signs are going to tell you whether or not that newspaper is included in the basic newspaper subscription or the full publisher extra subscription. Now, again, in the US, if you have the Ancestry All Access subscription, you have everything on newspapers, including all of those newspapers with the plus sign. But if you're purchasing your newspaper subscription directly through newspapers.com, you have options of choosing a basic subscription or publisher extra. Here's what publisher extra means. It means that these newspapers are most likely still under copyright, and they are definitely under a licensing agreement from the original publishers. And that means that Ancestry has an agreement, or newspapers.com has an agreement with the publisher to publish those, but that there are some restrictions around those. And so it also means we have to include them in a higher tier subscription because usually we're paying out royalties to that newspaper because they still own the rights in those papers. Okay, so that is what the little plus sign means. Now, once you click on any one of these papers, it will then show you the years that are available for that paper. Now, you'll notice right off the bat here, the Lehi banner, there is an 1891 paper, there's an 1893 paper. We just skipped right over 1892, 94, 95, 96, and so on. And that's because either the newspaper was not published during that year, or there are no surviving or known surviving issues of that paper for that particular year. So where we can fill in the gaps, we always do, and where we can't, you'll notice those gaps. Now you can select a year, and then it will show you the months that are available. You can select a month, and then it will show you the editions that are available. In this case, just based on what I'm seeing right here, I can tell you this is likely a weekly or bi-weekly publication with special editions. And you can probably figure that out then by clicking through to the particular newspaper. And it is a 4-page paper that comes out, it looks like once a week. And we might be missing one of the editions, or they just didn't publish it at that time for whatever reason. So that is how you browse to see what newspapers exist. And then, of course, you can click through and read it just like you would a newspaper. So to figure out if the locations where your ancestors lived even have newspapers available on newspapers.com, you're going to want to use that browse structure. Now, on newspapers.com, you'll notice this little ticker. There are currently 1.2 billion total pages of newspapers on the site, and that number gets augmented as they scan and upload new papers. And there are constantly new papers being scanned and uploaded. And when I say new, I don't mean newspapers published March 31st, 2026, though I do mean that too. That's just not only what I mean. I also mean there could be a newspaper from 1857 in Nebraska that that newspapers.com was able to finally get access to and publish on the site. There might be a newspaper from California from 1922 that newspapers was able to negotiate with the publisher for and get access to publish on the site. So there are new papers being published all the time. And then there are historic newspapers where access is gained, they are digitized, and they are published on the site. And so you're going to want to check back on a fairly regular basis. Now, let's talk about what is going to show up on Ancestry. Several years ago, some of our data analytics team were able to go through those 1.2 billion pages of newspapers on newspapers.com, and they were able to use AI to create algorithms that enable us to create searchable indexes to the images on newspapers. Traditionally, newspapers, right? This is just like a bag of words that was done by what we called optical character recognition. That was the traditional indexing of pages of newspapers for 2 decades or more, meaning a computer just read the page and then returned this like massive amounts of words. And then you could search for your ancestor, Elizabeth Wallingford, and it would show Elizabeth here and Wallingford here, but all we knew was that they were on the same page, and so we delivered that to you as a search result. Better than nothing. For decades, it was better than nothing. But now we have more advanced technology that allows us to do a couple of things. The first thing that we can do is we can start to identify the boundaries of articles. So there is an algorithm that we use that allows us to say, this is an article, and this is an article, and this is an article. And we can create boxes, essentially, or boundaries around each article. So then when information is read, it's only read at an article level instead of across the whole page. So that gives us more precise search results right off the bat. Okay. Then the second thing we can do is we can run an algorithm that looks at the words in that article, and we can tell based on the words in that article what kind of an article it is. And is this article a birth record? Is this a marriage announcement? Is it an obituary? Is it just some story about something that happened in the community? And we can tag that article about that. Okay, so Ancestry has gone through and done that with the newspapers on newspapers.com. And then we can create, then as like a third step, a searchable index based on that boundaries of the article and the tagging that is done. So here's what that is going to look like. There are, if you come into the card catalog on Ancestry and type in newspapers.com and click search, there are currently 69 databases, individual databases that are indexes to newspaper pages over on newspapers.com. Now, these databases are massive. So if I sort this by record count, what you'll quickly see, right? 1.8 billion individual records. So the name of a person is a record. Individual records that come out of the Pennsylvania Stories and Events Index. It was originally published back in June of 2023, and it was recently updated in January of this year. Because when it was indexed back in 2023, Then there were 2.5 years of additional newspapers being published over on newspapers.com. And so now we have to add those records into the index. So these databases get updated, as you can see, every, few years at this rate, okay, because we have to cycle through so many records. You can also sort it by collection title. That's an alphabetical sort that will show you exactly how they're broken out. Now, there are 4 different kinds of databases here that are indexes to newspapers.com. The first one you're going to see, and the most prevalent one, is going to be what we call the Stories and Events Index. And basically what that is just any interesting article that is not a birth, marriage, or death record. So birth, marriage, and death records, we've separated out into their own individual databases, and then kind of everything else gets categorized into those other databases. And we're calling those stories and events indexes, and you may see hints or search results leading to those. Okay, scroll down a little bit, you're going to see there's a Canadian Marriage Index database. So the stories and events indexes broken out by state. The marriage, birth, marriage, or the marriage and obituary indexes broken out by individual database here. Okay, and so as you scroll through these, you'll see like Ireland, Canada, Michigan, right? Like they're all these individual databases. Now, currently, we have stories and events indexes. I just want to make sure I'm clear about this because I may have misspoke. We have stories and events indexes, we have obituary indexes, and we have marriage indexes. We do have some birth indexes, but I don't think the birth indexes have yet been created for all of the countries. So kind of just keep that in mind as you're looking through these. But as you scroll through this list, you'll see all of those. Okay. Now, the final type of newspaper index that we have on Ancestry are the auctions of enslaved people and the bounties on freedom seekers. And these are from newspapers pre-1880. Okay, 752,000 records where we've been able to identify that this particular newspaper article or these 2 lines written in this paper are about a person being auctioned off as an enslaved person, or runaway slaves being sought by freedom seekers, being sought by people who have put a bounty on them. Okay, so that's a separate database as well. So that's how those are going to show up in Ancestry. So if you ever see these in your hints, or if you see these in your search results, that's what they mean, and that's where they come from. So AI, which is going to read it way better than a human and way faster, like no human is going to go through and type up all that information off of off of however many billion pages of newspapers, right? Like the idea is making it searchable for you, making it contextual within an article, and then tagging it as the type of thing that it is. And so that is where that information comes from. So it's an index that's going to point you to an image that exists over on newspapers.com. Now, you are going to see then these indexes show up in your tree as hints. I don't know what your level of experience is with Ancestry. If you're brand new, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the deep end. If you've been doing Ancestry for a while and you've kind of gotten through the census records and you've gotten through the available birth, marriage, and death records, and you kind of have started collecting pictures from your cousins, and you've just kind of started, like you're in a good place and you're now ready to start to dive into some of this newspapers research. No matter where you are in your journey, I just want to make sure you understand this, because sometimes people don't really have this clear in their mind. A really important thing you need to know about all hints on Ancestry is that a hint is a maybe, not a match. So what's happening is you've entered information into your tree, and an algorithm on Ancestry goes out and searches information that we have indexed in all kinds of different records and delivers that to you as a hint. Then we also go out and look and see, does anybody else have a person in their tree that looks like it might be the same person as this? And we do that constantly. And then we look and see what other records have they saved to their tree, and we give you those as hints. So every time you save a record on Ancestry to a person in your tree, you are generating hints for other people. So we always want to make sure that we understand that a hint is a maybe, not always a match. What that means is you have to open the hint and you have to look at it and you have to decide, is this really for my person? Keeping in mind that records like census records and draft cards and passenger lists, all of those records have been indexed by humans who are fallible and sometimes make mistakes. And records like newspapers and yearbooks and city directories and some of those other things, they were indexed by AI, which is not perfect yet. And so there could be mistakes. So we've got human mistakes and we've got computer mistakes, and we haven't even talked yet about the original mistakes on the record that the census taker or the guy filling out the passenger list or the journalist writing the article or the typesetter putting the type into the article may have made along the way. And so all along the way, there are opportunities for little errors or things that go wrong. And that is actually what makes it fun, is that we, as the family historians who are putting together the family tree, who are bringing the stories of our ancestors back to life, who are connecting back with that information and then sharing it out to our families, we're the ones who get to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And newspapers are a really great way to start to fill in some of that color and story and information in that puzzle. But we have to make sure that the hints that we're looking at are a match. And all hints start as a maybe, not a match. And so you have to go look at it. So hopefully you've developed some skills for evaluating hints, but we could all use a little bit of a refresher. And so I'm going to let the beginners know, and those of you who are a little more experienced, we're going to refresh our memories. Here's just a simple little checklist. When you are looking at a hint, you need to look at, first of all, does the name match? And what I mean by does the name match is it the same name? Not, is it spelled the same? Because spelling didn't count. And so you'll find names spelled 20, 30 different ways, given names, surnames. You'll find people with their initials. You'll find women listed as Mrs. John Smith with her husband's name. You'll find lots of different ways that people's names are listed, but you have to consider, is this a matching name or not? And just remember, it's not always, rarely, in fact, going to match exactly the way that you have it in your tree. And so you might be delivered hints that look like a little wackadoodle, but when you look a little closer, you realize, oh, she's listed by her husband's name, or, oh, he's listed by his initials, or, oh, that's his middle name. I didn't know that. Okay. So you're trying to make a name match. Then you're trying to make a place match. Okay. Now, with newspapers, remember I said newspaper articles can get published wherever, but does the actual article talk about the places where this person was from? Can I connect it to a place this person lived, worked, was born, married, died, served in the military? Like, do I know enough about them to see if this place matches or not? Because if you've got a total place mismatch and you can't reconcile that, this article probably isn't for your person, even if the name matches. So just because somebody has the same name doesn't mean it's the same person, even if you think it's the most unique name in the whole world. So does the name match? Does the place match? And then does the time period match? Okay. Now remember what I said earlier. If you know that somebody was born in 1885 and you've got all this evidence that they were born in 1885, but you're looking at an 1879 birth record, that might not be for your person, or the other information might have been misreported. Maybe she was trying to make herself younger as she got older. Like, lots of different ways you can reconcile that. But if this record was published in the newspaper in 1879, but you know your person was born in 1920, it's probably not a match. Okay. So names, dates, and places need to match. And then You also want to look at, especially in newspapers, some of the other little clues. Clues like addresses. Addresses are a really great way to tell if this really is your person or not. If you've looked at the address on the census, and I don't know about you, but I transcribe every record I find into my notes on Ancestry so that I have all of the details off the image, not just what was indexed, but every little bit of juicy goodness off that census page about that person and their family. And so what I've got right there in my notes then is the address that they lived at. And I can track that through time as I found them in a census and a city directory and on a draft card and like, right? And so then when I get a newspaper hint that tells me, oh, this John Smith that lived in this place at this time, and I've got a name, a date, and a place match, but then it lists a completely different address, I know it might not be my person. Or I might need to go dig into more detail to see if it really is my person. So addresses often give us a little bit more specific detail that tells us this is or this is not an article about my person. The next thing that you should look at on newspapers in particular is relationships. As it lists those relationships, you can start to figure out if this really is your person or not. And sometimes you have to string together multiple sets of information to decide if it is. So personally, I would never start with newspaper hints. When I'm building a family tree, I always start, especially if I'm doing US or Canadian or UK research, I'm always starting with the census because it's giving me the scaffolding of information about that family. Then I'm filling in the gaps with birth, marriages, and deaths where they exist. Those of you who are doing research in England, you're so lucky because your birth, marriage, and death records started in 1837. We have places here in the United States that didn't start keeping birth, marriage, and death records until the 1940s, right? So there's this kind of wide disparity depending on where your family is from, whether those records exist. But where they exist, you're going to fill in those gaps. You're going to use draft cards and military service records, naturalization records, and passenger lists. And then when you get to the newspapers, now you have this way of being more confident that this hint really is for your person or is not for your person. And then you can dig into the additional information that it tells you. So does the name match? Does the place match? Does the time period match? And then are there other clues like addresses and relationships that are going to help you determine if this record is for your person or is not for your person? Now, almost always that means you need to view the image. Viewing the information on the index is not always sufficient. And so that's why having that subscription or that access to those newspaper images becomes so critical, because you can't just look at the indexed information always and tell. Now, sometimes you can, and sometimes you can look at it and you can go, oh, I know that absolutely is not my person. But sometimes you can't tell for sure if it really is your person until you look at that image. So, if you've got enough information to tell you that you think this could be your person, it's worth clicking through to view the image and reading it. Awesome. If it's not, you can ignore that hint. Okay, so we're going to take a look at a couple of hints. Let me just share my screen one more time here. So that we can walk through what these are going to look like in your tree in our last few minutes, and then how you can best save these records to your tree. Okay, so I'm looking at some hints here. You can see I've got stories and events. I've actually filtered this list down to just Arkansas. That's where my mama's family is from. And we're going to take a look at let's see, this individual right here, Thomas J. Dunlap. I've got a hint here from 1924 in Berryville, Arkansas. I should probably just double check, make sure I'm sharing my screen. Yes, I am. In Berryville, Arkansas, in the Arkansas newspapers, Stories and Events Index. Now, I'm going to right-click on that and open that up in a new tab. I'm also going to right-click on Thomas's name and open that up in a new tab. And so now up here, you can see I haven't left my all hints list. It's still sitting there waiting for me. I've got Thomas's profile page open so that I can see what else I know about him, what other information I might have in the notes that I have collected, what I know about his family members. And then I've got this Ancestry index to the newspapers.com image. And what this tells me is that Tom Dunlap is mentioned in the newspaper. The tag on this is other, meaning it's not a birth or a marriage or a death, recognizable as that. This is the date. This is the place. So the name matches, not exactly, but close enough. The date makes sense, right? He would have been about 80 years old at the time. The place matches. Last time I had him in a record, he was in Arkansas. Now, I haven't done as much information or as much searching on this guy as I probably should have just yet. So you're seeing this live. I've never seen this article before. Okay, then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to open this image in a new tab as well. So now I've got the index here and I've got the image here so that I can toggle back and forth when I need to. Now, this looks like some society news. Denver is a community in that particular part of Arkansas, northwest corner there. This looks like a lot of stuff happening on this page that I'm going to want to read at some point. But here under the items, it says Tom Dunlap and family were Sunday visitors at the B.S. Norris home. Now, Norris is a name that I recognize in our family tree. And I suspect that the Norrises are either his cousins or maybe a sister and brother-in-law. I'd have to go dig into my tree to find. So this gives me a little bit of information about the fact that they're still living, B.S. Norris and his family are still living in Denver in 1924. So there are a couple of different ways you can save this record. If there is an index record to it on Ancestry, I highly recommend always using this feature to save this record. So you're going to click yes if it's a hint or save if it's a search result, and you're going to come through and you're going to save this record to this person in this tree. What that's going to do is it's going to add a source citation right here. As a matter of fact, let me go find one in my tree so that you can see what that looks like. It's going to add a source citation in your tree for that record, and Ancestry will create that for you. So that's the first reason why I would do it that way. So if I come down here, you'll see I've got, right, newspapers that I have saved from a hint or a search result. And it creates a little source citation with citation details. It has a link that you can click through to view the original image over on newspapers.com. It's got all my associated facts. And then there is a thumbnail that gets put into the gallery. Okay. Now, sometimes you may just be over on newspapers.com searching like a maniac, finding things that are either not indexed yet, because remember, we only update those indexes every few years because it's a massive project, and the newspaper just came online, or maybe it was missed for some reason in that AI indexing, and so you're finding newspapers directly on newspapers.com. And if you do that, you can use this little feature over here to clip the article, which just allows you to adjust the boundaries of what it is you want to save. So if I don't want to save the whole society column, though I'm seeing a lot of familiar names as I skim down this column, if you don't want to save the whole column, you can just clip it or snip it to what you want to save. And then you can give your little clip a title. You could tag it if you want to get really fancy, and then you can save that clipping. Then you can save directly to Ancestry. So now I can save that clipping to Thomas J. Dunlap in my tree this way. And that will allow me to save it. Now, when I save a record that way, it's going to look a little different in my tree. Down here, it's going to add that instead of being an Ancestry source, which is a source to the index and a link to the image, it's going to save it as a newspapers.com source under other sources. That source is still going to have this information, all the source citation details and a link to the image or the clipping that you made over on newspapers.com. Now, there are a couple of things I just want to make clear before we wrap up today. One is any articles that you save from the index or save through the clipping, all we do on Ancestry is we just put a low resolution thumbnail in your gallery so that you know it exists. You can then click through to view the original image over on newspapers.com. Remember, I said Ancestry does not own most of those newspapers. We've licensed them, and in some cases, many cases, we pay royalties based on the views of those images to the newspaper owners. And so by viewing it on newspaper, you're allowing us to account correctly how those images are getting viewed so that we can make sure that we fulfill those licensing obligations. So the low resolution thumbnail just gets saved to your gallery to let you know it's a placeholder, but you can always click through from the image or through from the source citation to get back to that original. The second thing I want to make sure is really clear is that when you clip an article on newspapers.com, that goes into a clippings file. So you have, everybody that has a login on newspapers.com, you have a clippings file, and that clippings file becomes available to you whether you have an active subscription or not. So if I'm clicking through to view those and I've clipped them, I have that visibility. The one thing you do not want to do is you never want to download an image from newspapers.com and then upload it to Ancestry. That becomes like a violation of the terms and conditions and the licensing agreements that we have in place with those. And we all want to be good stewards of the records because we always want to make sure that we can get more records. We always want more records, right, as genealogists. Now, I hope that that was useful to help you understand what's possible to find in newspapers, some of the ways that you can find those in Ancestry through those hints or through actually searching some of those individual databases, or you can go over and search on newspapers.com. The really great thing about collecting all of these newspapers is that records, all records, census records, passenger lists, draft cards, and newspaper clippings, all of those records are just raw material. The stories are the reward, and newspapers help us to fill in the stories probably better than just about any other resource that I use in family history. So I cannot wait to learn more about what you are discovering in newspapers. If you're watching this on the YouTube channel as a recording later, or if you're watching live and want to come find the recording, I would love to hear what you start to discover. But if you're watching this live, especially, or on YouTube, before we go today, in the chat, will you please just leave one new thing you learned today? That's super helpful for me because it helps me continue to create these virtual events each week that are meeting you where you are and giving you what you need. And so it's helpful to understand what people are learning. So if you could just type out one new thing you learned. And I think it's also helpful for you. I think having to articulate what you learned means you're more likely to remember it. And we know there's so much to learn in family history to continue to make the discoveries that we want to make. So I will keep showing up here every Wednesday for the Ancestry virtual events. You can find the full list of previous events and the upcoming 3 events at ancestry.com/education. You can register for the upcoming events there. They are free to attend, but you do need to register if you want to ever attend live because that's how we send you the Zoom link to show up here live with us. So thank you so much for being with me here today. I will see you around the internet or next Wednesday. Until next time, I'm Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.